Organized by Contemporanea Progetti in collaboration with the Museo Stibbert, this exhibition features Renaissance arms and armor from the Stibbert's world-renowned collection in Florence, Italy. We are very fortunate to have the exhibition's organizing curators, Riccardo Franci, who will present this evening's lecture, and Martina Beccatini of the Museo Stibbert here with us this evening. We are also delighted to welcome Linda Carioni from Contemporanea Progetti. The Frist Art Museum gratefully acknowledges our supporters for this exhibition, supported in part by the Sandra Shatton Foundation and the Anne and Joe Russell family, with additional funding from the Frist Art Museum's Friends of Renaissance Art. Spanish translation sponsor is the Center for Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies at Vanderbilt University. As always, we are grateful for the continuing operating support from the Frist Foundation, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Tennessee Arts Commission, and the National Endowment for the Arts. It's now my pleasure to introduce Riccardo Franchi. After earning a degree in conservation of cultural heritage, Riccardo studied in Japan at the University of Nara. Since 2003, he has worked for the Museo Stibbert and is currently the curator of the Armory. He has curated special exhibitions in Italy and abroad and published books and articles about European and Japanese arms and armor. Please join me in welcoming Riccardo Franchi.
Kind ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here today. Let me start saying a big thank you to the Frist Art Museum for inviting me to this special opening event. The collaboration between the Frist and the Stibbert Museum is now at its third event after the first exhibition about samurai of 2016-17 and the exhibition about the marriage chest of Renaissance time of 2018-19. Both realized that thanks to the great work and hard work of Contemporanea Progetti. Thank you. And I really hope that we will have other future occasions for collaboration to some interesting projects. I'm very excited to be here in Nashville because the exhibition on samurai was my very first international exhibition. So I'm very happy to be again here where this adventure started. Today I will talk about the aesthetic of knights in armor. It's a big and complex subject, so I will give you just an outline and a point of view. As a front cover of my speech, I choose this really nice illustration by Norman Rockwell. Here we can see a young boy intensely reading a book of knight stories, for sure, and he imagined to be a knight himself. And it's very interesting to see how he imagined to be a knight. Riding a horse, of course, holding a lance with his right hand, because for sure he won a lot of tournament and jousting, and completely dressed with a beautiful steel plate armor. And why not, with a beautiful princess at his back. This is a very common idea of how should be a perfect knight. It's a common idea that we all, or at least many of us, has of a medieval knight. Medieval knights, yes, because when we talk about knight, we refer to a phenomenon spanning from the 7th, 8th century up to the Renaissance time in the 16th century. It means that the greatest part of the story of knights is in the Middle Ages. And the idea of a perfect knight dressed in armor is almost the same that we see in this illustration made by Norman Rockwell. This idea is so common that it's very easy to find in many forms of art of our society, this representation of a medieval knight. In my opinion, the best way to prove what I'm saying is to have some example taken, for example, from famous and popular movies. So let's see together a few of these movies and see how those knights are represented in these movies. We start with a real classic. It's Excalibur by John Boorman, 1981. Very famous. Do you know it? It's very famous. The movie is inspired from a romance, The Death of Arthur, by Thomas Malory. In the movies are told all the famous stories related to King Arthur's life. You probably know the Sword in the Rock, Merlin the Sorcerer, the Lady of the Lake, the Knights of the Round Table. This is the plot of this movie. King Arthur, by historians, is placed somewhere around the 6th and 7th century in history, so at the very beginning of the Middle Ages. But let's have a look of how John Boorman decided to dress his knights. We can see a complete suits of armor made by big plates of steel covering all the body of the warriors, big breastplates, big pauldron, the protection for the shoulder, with the haute pieces, these pieces for the protection of the neck, and shiny steel everywhere. This movie is full of shining armor. It's a very beautiful movie from visual point of view. And look on the right side, we have in this movie, this is Lancelot, wearing a beautiful armor in the so-called bat-wing style, because all the plates of the armor looks like a bat wing, and it's decorated by the Holy Grail embossed in on the breastplate. Very impressive and very cool knights in this movie. Let's see next one. Well, The First Knight by Jerry Zucker, 1995. Again, it's the word of King Arthur. So the first knight is Lancelot, becoming the first knight of the Round Table. And all the story is related to the Queen Guinevere, who has to choose between Sean Connery and Richard Gere. Hard choice indeed. In this movie, they decided not to use complete suits of armor, just to suggest the shape or the figure of knights. They used breastplates and gauntlets. But see the breastplate they used. Again, a full breastplate made by a single plate of a shining steel. And look at the gauntlet. It's a small gauntlet, but made by separate fingers. It's a very distinctive gauntlet. Going on. Okay, A Knight's Tale by Brian Helgeland, 2001. This too is quite famous movie indeed. In this movie, we have a story inspired by A Knight's Tale from the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, and it's dating about the second half of 14th century, so about the end of the Middle Ages. Let's have a look to the armor chosen for this movie. Again, we have a complete suit of armor made by big plates of steel, enclosing completely the body of the warrior. Again, big pauldron covering the shoulders of the two horsemen. And look at the helmet. They are closed helmet. They are helmet that cover completely the head with a face piece, removable face piece. And if you look on the left side, the black knight. Of course, it's a black because he's a very bad guy. He's a villain in the movie. He also has these haute pieces over the pauldron, and this is for improving the boldness of the character in these movies. They are two perfect medieval knights indeed, represented in this movie. Coming to our days, 2021, Ridley Scott tells the story of The Last Duel. The movie is inspired by real fact happening in 1386. And the story is that of a knight who asked to the queen a trial by combat against an esquire who made violence to his wife. And it's a real historical, documentary historical happening in France. Look at the armor. Here, Matt Damon is wearing a complete suit of armor. You see that the arms are completely covered by steel. But look at the pauldron for the shoulder. Very big pauldron made by solid steel. And how big they are. They look like a sort of American football player. This because they imagined that Ridley Scott wanted to give to his warrior was that of a very powerful warrior. And so he used this kind of protection. Okay, here something different, okay? Not more historical movie, but science fiction. This is The Mandalorian by Jon Favreau. It's a series of 2019. I don't know if you know the story of The Mandalorian, but this character, the Mandalorians in the series are a sort of warrior monks with a strong belief leading all their lives and their actions. It's quite easy to recognize in this the Templar Knights that you see in the picture on the right. Templar Knights were warrior monks with their stronghold in the Great Temple of Jerusalem. And their mission was to help the pilgrims going to the Holy Land. If we look to the armor of the Mandalorian, we see that the helmet is easily recognizable as a Greek helm inspired to the Templar. But look at the armor. Again, to improve the boldness of the character, they used a complete armor made by big, flashing plate made of steel. Well, we saw a few examples of perfect medieval knights. But, well, believe or not, none of the armor that we saw until now is from the Middle Ages. All the armors that we saw are Renaissance-style armor. And of course, these are movies, so they didn't need any historical accuracy. But the point is, why for depicting, creating a medieval knight, they used this very kind of armor instead of a real medieval armor. I made a small experiment for you. I searched the Google for medieval armor. You can easily see that no medieval armor at all. All the armor are from Renaissance time, or at least inspired to Renaissance time model. Well, so I decided to go a little further, and I asked for real medieval armor. Well, almost no change. Just in the first position, we have the friends from the Metropolitan Museum of New York giving us late 14th century armor that can be considered real medieval. So, quite funny thing. Why Google gives no good result for medieval armor or real medieval armor? Well, probably you know that Google, for his search engine, uses an algorithm that gives you what it thinks that you are searching for. This means that almost all the people searching on Google for medieval armor were looking for this kind of armor. Quite strange. But why our society, make this mistake between medieval and Renaissance armor? Well, it's a simple matter of aesthetic. We will see why in a while. But before, let's take a step back in past and let's see how were the real medieval armor. Okay, we have here the Stuttgart Psalter from 9th century and a picture of a knight of that period. You can see that the armor at this time was just a dress covered by scales made by iron or also made by leather. Just the helmet is made by steel plates riveted together, forming a small helmet covering just the top of the head of the warrior. In this period, the real protection for the warrior was the big shield that he is holding with his left hand. The armor in this time has not a real shape. It's just the dress covering the body of the warrior and taking just the shape of the body. Let's go a couple of centuries later. Here we have an image from the Bayeux tapestry in France, 11th century. We can see that the warriors are covered by chainmail. So the big change is the introduction of chainmail for covering the bodies of the warrior. Again, only this kind of protection covers the body, while the most effective protection is, again, the big elongated shield that this warrior are holding with the left hand. Again, only the helmet, a small helmet, covers the top of the head with the introduction of a nose piece, a short nose piece for protecting the face. Again, not a real shape for armor, just a dress covering the body. Okay, here we have the Westminster Psalter. We are in the 13th century. Nothing changed for the body of the warrior. Completely dressed in chainmail from head to feet. In this period was introduced the most important news was the introduction of the so-called great helm that you can see a guy leaning from a tower in the corner, in the right corner, is holding for this knight. We already saw when talking about the Mandalorian, it's the same kind of helmet. But again, the protection for the warrior is a simple dress made by chainmail with not a specific shape in itself. Simple shape, not distinctive at all, even after 4th century. Okay. We're passing to the 14th century. Here we have the silver altar of St. James in Pistoia, Italy. And in this 14th century altar, we see a few of warriors that are wearing something that now can be considered an armor, okay, made by steel plates. That's because from this period were introduced the new techniques for working irons and for producing iron. So the availability of plates of armors was easier to access and was very much cheaper than before. So the warrior could use this kind of material to make the protection for their bodies. You see that legs and arms are covered by steel plates, and the body is completely enclosed by a big breastplate made by steel. But the helmet is still simple. They are small they are boards, simple boards made of steel. And at this time, no pauldron as a protection for the shoulder. The pauldron was the last piece of armor to be introduced because it's the most difficult part to imagine and to realize, because to enclose completely the shoulder of a warrior without blocking the arm was very difficult to obtain. But from the following century, it was introduced also the pauldron. But anyway, from this century, the warrior starts to look not so bad, right? Finally, we are passing on the left side to the 15th century. It's the entering of the Renaissance time, okay? And for the first time, we can see a complete suit of armor enclosing perfectly the full body of the warrior. And for the first time, the armor is designed to look good. The shiny surfaces, the line, the elegance of the shape made from this period the armor a sort of a piece of fashion. So the landlords asking for armor in this period asked for a beautiful armor that could be wear as a symbol of power. It's very different from the previous times. From the following century, the 16th century, we can see on the right side of the image, the armor changed again, and the metalsmiths working on the armor started to introduce in their production the same aesthetic rules that were used for civil costumes. You can see I'm showing a portrait of a gentleman wearing a velvet dress, and you can see it's the same model and the same decoration of the armor. So from the 16th century, the engravings and the decoration that you can find on armors are exactly the same that you can find on costumes and textile and dresses. Well, from this time, from this period, we can honestly say that the warrior have a great look. They're very cool looking, right? And the same thing should be in the mind of those who rediscovered the Middle Ages and Renaissance during the 19th century. Yes, because the great mistake between the Renaissance and medieval armor started there, from the 19th century. Of course, medieval artists painted and sculpted what they have in front of their eyes. So no mistake in armor in the works of art of Middle Ages and Renaissance time. They just had in front of their eyes what they're representing. But from the 17th century, weapons like swords or armors slowly disappeared from daily life for the introduction of firearms and other events. And from the 18th century, medieval was considered a sort of barbaric and dark age, and somewhat was forgot. But in the 19th century, following the artistic movement of Romanticism, artists started to again to take inspiration from the past time, and particularly from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. I'm showing a page of a very famous romance, Ivanhoe, by Sir Walter Scott, that was a cornerstone in this Gothical and medieval revival. But this rediscovery was not made in a philological and historical way. It was made more in a dreamy way. The artists were not searching for a scientific view of the past, but for a sort of a dream of the Middle Age. So, when dreaming of a brave paladin of King Arthur, why imagine him on a sad and shapeless chainmail attire? It's far better to imagine him on a flashing and fashionable dress of steel, don't you agree? And this is why, from the 19th century, we assist to this misrepresentation of the medieval knights. And this is lasting to our days. For example, it happens often of people coming to our museum wondering of how many medieval arms and armor we have, or comments written in the internet about of the Stibbert is very rich of arms and armor from the medieval times. Of course, it's not so. We are full of Renaissance time arms and armor, but it's a common view, this one. I'm showing a couple of examples of what happened in the 19th century. In this painting, Sir John Everett Millais imagined an errant knight saving a beautiful lady. Errant knights was a phenomenon common around the year 1000. But Millais decided to dress his warrior not with a chainmail, how was common during the year 1000, but he decided to use a beautiful German late 15th century armor. The armor is a complete suit of armor made by steel plates decorated by fluting, so the small lines embossed to enlighten the shape of the armor. And it's completely made in the so-called bat wings style that we already saw. So it's a beautiful image of a warrior, far better than if he had used a chainmail, probably. And the same thing made a few decades later John William Waterhouse painting his Tristan. Again, Tristan was a paladin of the Round Table of King Arthur. So again, the beginning of the Middle Ages. But Waterhouse decided to portray his Tristan using an armor quite similar to the previous one, that of Millais. And it's a late 15th century German armor in the bat wing style, completely decorated by the fluting and small lines embossed. And the portrait by Waterhouse is very detailed. He even painted the shoes made for riding a horse. This is a great armor for horse riding. And those shoes, very long, were designed for horse riding. And we can just imagine how the poor Tristan could walk on a moving boat with these shoes. Embarrassing. Well, we now understand that aesthetic is an important key to the appreciation and the study of arms and armor. And this is why we decided to focus our exhibition on the aesthetic of the knights. Also because real medieval armor still in existence are very few, and they look or at best like this, okay? We have an 11th century helmet that we saw in the illustration before, and a great helm from the 13th century. Or something like this. It's an 11th century chainmail armor with a bowl helmet. Of course, historically, they are very significant, but definitely not good looking. But what makes the aesthetic of a knight in armor? His equipment, of course, and above all, his armor. We told about the evolution, the technical evolution of the armor in the Renaissance in the Middle Ages up to the Renaissance time. And we saw that poor things were made about the aesthetic of armors in the Middle Ages. But from the Renaissance time, the powerful landlords started to ask for distinctive armors. And the armorer began to study the best way to improve the aesthetic of their armors. These improvements were mainly in two aspects: the shape, the overall shape, and the decoration. It depended mainly in the period and in the geographical area where these craftsmen worked. Let's see together some example of this armor. All the examples that you will see here, you will find them in the exhibition. So later you can go to see from with your eyes after the lecture. We said that great attention was made in the overall aspect of the armors. The proportion, elegance, and fashion were very important elements for the success of a suit of armor. Here we see a couple of armor from the early 16th century. On the left side, German, on the right side, Italian. Look how different they are. The German one is all played on the circle design. It's all roundish. The helmet is round, the breastplate is round, the protection for the armpits and the knees and elbows is all roundish. And all covered by the fluting, so this small embossed line to give a sense of lightness to the armor. This is a perfect Maximilian style armor. The name Maximilian style comes from the fact that this style of armor was favored by the Emperor Maximilian I. If you look at the Italian armor, it's more simple, clean line, smooth surfaces. This armor just plays with light. Just a small changing on the plates change how the light reflects on the surfaces. And so even if it looks simpler than the German one, in my opinion, it has a more authentic sense of elegance. It's typical Italian, this. Also, the different parts of armor reflect the taste of the period in which they were made. And usually they follow the civilian costume fashion. Let's see a few examples. In this case, we have a couple of helmets. Helmets, of course, are probably the most important part of the armor. And you will see that you can find many different typologies, many different designs. Also in our exhibition, we chose many helmets with a very fantastic shape and all different each other. In this case, I chose two German helmets. The difference is that one is from the beginning of the 16th century, the other one from the middle of 16th century. Just few decades of distance in time, but huge difference in shape and decoration. The first one is a Maximilian style helmet that we already saw before. It's roundish and somewhat flat in its shape. Just a few decades later, completely different helmet. Very elongated helmet, very pointed, with a complicated face pieces. And if before we had just decoration with moving the surfaces, from the half of the century, we see the introduction of decoration by engravings. Something similar happens with breastplates. Also, breastplates have a very big difference each other, and they can differ in very big way. Look on the difference of the height, for example, the height of the breastplate. The first one is very short breastplate. Please don't consider the protection for the neck. While the last one is a very high breastplate going up to the shoulder. But look at the belly part. The first one is completely round, while the middle one has a very pronounced point in the center. In the picture it's not well visible, but when you will see in the exhibition, this piece is very outstanding for this characteristic. While the third one is very smooth and elongated. All these differences have as a main purpose the aesthetic, okay? But we saw the shape, how shapes changes in armor. But what about the decoration of the surface of the armor? We will see together the different techniques used for decoration of the armor, and you will find them all in our exhibition. The first technique is coloring the surfaces, and the easiest way was painting the surfaces of the armor. In this case, we have a beautiful German black and white armor. Painting had two main purposes. Decoration, of course, easy. The other one is to protect the surface from rusting, because this painting is made by a mixture of tar and other substances used for protecting the surface against the rust. You may ask if figurative painting does exist on armor. Well, it's not common to have a figurative painting on armor. There are only few examples existing and all coming from Eastern Europe, but only few existing to our days. The same effects as the painting was the patination using chemicals. The chemical reacting with the surface of the iron creates stable surface patinas which give colors and protect the iron from rusting. In this very case, we talk of bronzing because of the chocolate brown color of the patina. The result of this kind of treatment is beautiful. This armor becomes a sort of a monument to see. When you will see in our exhibition, this armor stands out from the other for its monumental aspect. And the warrior wearing this armor becomes a sort of a monument to himself. So it's a very pretentious armor, we can say. Gilding was, of course, one of the most spectacular and rich way to give color to the armor. And even more if applied to engraved surfaces, like in these cases. Gold was applied in two ways. One with a mercury solution. So mercury mixed with gold was used as a paint. Then the plate was heated in oven until the mercury evaporates, leaving just the gold on the surfaces. Very dangerous thing to do, because mercury is a very powerful poison. The other technique was applying a gold foil on the surfaces. Gold foil has a very low melting point. After you made your design by the gold foil, you heat the steel plates until the gold stitch on the surface. You can use gold alone as on the back plate on the right, but you can improve the coloring effect using also the blackening together with gilding, as we can see in the vamp brace in the left. The latest technique introduced for coloring the surfaces was the bluing. Bluing was made by heating the steel at a certain temperature. Different temperature makes different colors. It's easy to understand that it's very hard to obtain homogeneous colors. In the image on the right, I put a piece from our collection. You can see that the color has a gradient. This means that this heating was not made in a perfect way. So it's a very difficult technique, but the result is outstanding. Just imagine a complete suit of armor of blue color under the shining of the sun. It's a very beautiful kind of decoration. Another way to decorate the armors was engraving. And it consists on removing material from the surfaces by chiseling or by etching by acids. Chiseling was made by scratching and scraping the designs on the surfaces, while etching was made covering the surfaces with a protective, could be wax or tar, then scratching the design on this surface, and then soaking the piece into acid. Usually it's nitric acid. So the uncovered part is corroded by the acid, leaving the design on the surface. It's easy to understand that engraving could be a dangerous technique, because if you take out too material, you can weaken the plates of the armor. So you must be very careful while especially etching the surfaces. This technique of engravings became very favored from the second quarter of the 16th century, and all the most important workshops involved in making armors started to produce armor decorating with this style, and had inside the workshop craftsmen dedicated to the engraving, because it requested probably a full life of training to have good result for engravings. Of course, everything can be improved by gold, so the etching can be enlightened with the gold and with blackening, or a combination of the two. In this case, we can see that this neck part has the background made with the small dots. It's for recalling the velvet surfaces. We told that they wanted to look like civil costumes. This is an example of this. On this helmet, we can see another way of decorating the surfaces. It's by inlay. It's made by a very fine chiseling in which the silver is hammered inside, and then again by chisel the final shape of the silver is created. It's not a very common technique for decorating the armor, and greatest number of this kind of decoration is by silver, but also in gold can be found. It's a typical of production of the area between France and Germany, and is peculiar to the armor, the so-called parade armor, because this is a very weak kind of decoration. When using pieces of silver can easily jump out, with damaging the decoration. The latest technique introduced in the world of armors was embossing. It is common from the very end of the 16th century. The highest quality pieces of this kind of armor were made in Milan, Italy, and in Paris, France, and the French area. It was made by hammering a thin iron plate from the backside into molds, and then from the right side, with chiseling, the decoration was refined. This decoration is very peculiar of parade armors. Only parade armor could use this kind of decoration, because the plates used for this were very thin, so not suitable for protecting during a battle. And the embossed decoration had many weak points where swords or spears could easily pass through. Also, embossing, as everything, can be improved by gilding, like our legs that we are exhibiting in our exhibition. Sometimes gilding was applied with small inlays and damascening for having the most decorated aspect possible. This kind of armor, the embossed armor, are the apotheosis, the highest level in the art of armor, and represent the very final stage of the history of armor. In a few decades, they were not of any use in the battlefields for the introduction of firearms. And quickly they lost also their value as a status symbol for the powerful landlords. And slowly they become just relics of a glorious past and collectible for dreaming collectors, as our Stibbert was. Now I hope that we all understand how much important is the aesthetic in the world of knights in armor, and why we decided to present the knights at their very best, or in the Renaissance time. Since the Stibbert Museum is plenty of arms and armor from the Renaissance, we could choose very beautiful pieces, creating an extraordinary experience in the different aspects of the world of knights in armor. And I really hope that you will enjoy it. Thank you. If any question is highly welcome.
Thank you. Armor was an element of war and battles. Let's take the Renaissance period. Which types of soldiers got to wear this type of armor in a large battle?
Well, complete suits of armor were toys for very rich people. So to have an armor like this one, it's usually we make a paragon to today's life, and we say that a suit of armor like this is how today to have a Ferrari. So low-level soldiers usually use only few parts of armor for protecting themselves, not complete suits. Usually they have at best just a breastplate and a simple helmet. Then when richness and power increase, also the armor goes up in the efficiency and in aesthetic, of course.
Hey, I was wondering, why did the helmets have a crest across the top, like the mohawk-looking thing?
It's very common to see crests in helmets. It has mainly two functions. One is to improve the resistance of the helmet to shots by heavy weapons. The other one is aesthetic. Aesthetic is the first word when you talk about the armor. So we also saw helmet with no crest at all. And the crest, you find the crest starting from a certain period on. For sure, it also is useful for protecting for maces, for example, because in the movies, for example, we see a lot of duels by swords against this kind of armor, but a sword has almost no effect on this kind of armor. So the only weapons useful against a full suit of armor like this were lance on a charge, of course. Maces, they used a lot of iron maces during the battles in armor, or the crossbow. Only the 3 arms are effective against this kind of armor. And some of the elements of the armor were created to protect from these 3 armors. And the crest is one of these.
Hi. I believe you touched on the fact that the technique changed, I believe, in the 14th century. Can you briefly talk about what the technique was before and why it changed and what it became? Thank you.
Well, the most important fact on the changing of on the production of iron was the introduction of new furnaces for smelting the iron. In this period, a new kind of furnaces were created, and they could provide much more amount of iron that could be used for making everything. And since this technique provided a higher quantity of metal using less quantity of minerals, also the price of the iron went down. Until this period, the 14th century, iron was very precious material. We consider now iron is cheap material. You find iron everywhere. But in the past, iron was very expensive because to produce iron, you need mineral, of course, but a huge amount of charcoal, for example, to produce just a ton of iron. And this is common all over the world. In all the countries, when you approach the study of the production of the iron, you see this phenomenon. In the very point of the introduction of a new technology in the production of iron, civilization changes. It's a key point of the production of iron in our world.
Thank you for this wonderful lecture. You mentioned that being a fashionista was an important part of being a knight. And I noticed that in this image and in the images up in the exhibit, a couple of the models are wearing matching skirts to their horses. I didn't know if that was a regional kind of thing or if it was a protective thing. So what do you got to say about the skirts?
Well, yes, everyone wears skirts, the knights and also the horses. In the past, it was very common things to wear skirts of any kind, also for men. In the case of the horses, it had more an aesthetic purpose. Again, aesthetic. We can see late 14th century and 15th century paintings and portraits of jousting events, for example, where the horses are completely covered with the dresses of with clothes and textile, very rich textile and very richly decorated, very colorful, feathers everywhere. So all these features were intended for make spectacular any kind of event. For sure, in a real battle, no textile on horses, no feathers, less fashion.
You mentioned during your talk that there are some pieces from Eastern Europe that have full paint on the armor. What countries and what time period are those pieces from?
Oh, you can find these pieces from the late 14th century up to the early 16th century, mainly from actual Hungary. Okay, they use this kind of painted armors, but please don't figure the judgment of Michelangelo. Okay, they are simple design with small flowers, for example, or the helmet were painted with the fake faces, with the mustache or eyes. And you can find them, for example, in Vienna, in the Royal Armory. And if I don't mistake something, also in New York, at the Metropolitan, they have a couple of pieces like this.
Hi, thank you so much. So my question is about how much things weigh, and we talked about parade armor versus a battle armor like what we're seeing here, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how much it would weigh and how much you'd have to be able to like carry to put that on.
Yeah, knights from a very early age were trained, or the warriors, not only knights, were trained to dress armor and to use weapons. A complete suit of armor like this one goes about 40 pounds of weight. While the jousting armor, the most complicated jousting armor can double this weight. In that case, they are not, cannot consider them armor. They are a sort of building made of steel, okay? The warrior inside cannot even move a finger. They were just placed over a horse and just run against their adversaries. That's all. They cannot, probably they just can adjust, but not too much, the point of the lance.
In talking about that point, that bulge that's in some of the chest plates, you mentioned that was aesthetic and not to a practical purpose. Is that based on an existing fashion that existed, like a cloth fashion?
They copied the dresses that were in use in the same period. If you went to a court of a nobleman, you can see a corselet with the exact shape. This is the reason for this shape. Someone thinks, for example, also this one, okay, the breastplate, you can see a ridge in the middle. Someone thinks, okay, it's for protecting from lances or swords. No, it cannot protect you from a lance, just a ridge in the middle of the breastplate. This is an aesthetic point inspired by the civil costume of the same period.
We'll take one more question.
This is more of a technical question. I think it was your last image with the gold, the embossing with the gold.
Mm-hmm.
Gold being a soft metal, so it's purely decorative. There's a steel under strata, and how is the gold applied?
In that very case, it's by mercury solution. That kind is made by mercury solution. It's a mixture, probably you know that mercury liquefied gold. When you put the gold inside the mercury, everything became liquid, okay? You use this paint for covering the plates, right? And then you put inside an oven this place covered with this painting. Mercury has a very low boiling point. So the mercury evaporates quickly, leaving on the surfaces just the gold. And then there is a system to recover the mercury to use again in another work. Dangerous work.
Well, thank you so much, Riccardo, for a wonderful introduction to Knights in Armor. Thank you all so much for coming.